The sundown only looked empty, but it wasn't. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. We are returning to our series on hotel horror for a final episode in the series. And this time, we are checking into the Sun Down Motel.
So, listeners, I'm going to start us off here. Just like Matt said, we are visiting another motel hotel for our hotel horror series. And tonight we're going to be talking about Simone St. James's The Sundown Motel, which I know is a book that Matt read a while back and told us how much he liked it and that we should read it. And so I have owned this book for a while, but I read it for the first time for this particular episode. So, to get us started off, I'm going to talk just a little bit of background. I'm not going to go into great detail about the book, but the book came out in 2020. And something. So, if you listen to the Monster Spirit podcast, you know, listeners, that I have read other Simone St. James books and really enjoyed them. So, I have read The Haunting of Maddie Clare, the Book of Cold Cases, and the shorter piece, Ghost 19, which I guess would be like a long short story or maybe a novella. And I enjoyed all three of them, and so I was excited to add the Sundown Motel to the list, and I enjoyed it as well. I have to say I have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for The Haunting of Maddie Clare because that is a ghost story and also a supernatural investigation story, which I very much enjoyed. The Sundown Motel, like the Book of Cold Cases, is a bit more contemporary. And if you've read the Book of Cold Cases, you're familiar with St. James's use of dual timelines that kind of mirror each other, which she also does in Sundown Motel. The other thing I wanted to throw out there is when I started reading her stuff, I got really interested in how her fiction shifted from being more like, I guess you would say, like historical ghost stories, historical fiction with ghosts, to supernatural thrillers. I also read her most recent one, Murder Road, which is also really, really good and a supernatural thriller, I guess you would call it. And so I listened to a couple podcasts with her on them when Murder Road came out. One was the Talking Scared podcast, and one was the She Wore Black podcast. And so if you're interested in learning more about her, and her kind of journey as an author, shifting genres a little bit as her career continued, I highly recommend listening to an interview with her. It's really interesting. So, first, I'm going to tell just a little bit about the book and my impressions, and then I'm going to throw it to Matt and Lisa. As I mentioned earlier, we have dual timelines here. So, part of the book takes place in 1982 when we're with a character, Vivian Delaney, who wants to kind of move away from the Midwest, get away from her mother, and she wants to go to New York. And on the way to New York City to become an actress, she ends up in this small town in upstate New York, Fell, and she gets a job at the Sundown Motel and ends up staying there for a bit, where she learns about this whole history of missing and murdered women in this town. And so you have these kind of this very, very traumatic and dark history. The characters who've lived there for a while talk about, especially the women, talk about how every time one of these terrible crimes would occur, they would be terrified because they knew it could be them. And there was this idea of it's like a warning. And these crimes are either unsolved or the correct person has not been charged. Um, we know from our second timeline in 2017, when Viv's niece has gone to Fell to investigate what happened, that Viv herself disappeared, leaving all her stuff in the Sundown Motel, almost as if perhaps she was taken. And so the book kind of runs along the dual timelines with the reader learning about what Viv was learning as she attempts to solve the crimes. And then Carly, in our present time, coming to terms with the fact that she's trying to understand how her aunt died, an aunt that she never knew. and meeting people along the way, as she does this, meeting people who are in the town or maybe know something about the town. So I guess I'll give my impressions first off. I love a good ghost story. So the idea of a haunted motel was fascinating to me. I think, one of the things we talked about in our first episode about why hotels are scary, I think, Lisa, you were the one who talked about that it's not just that the hotel itself is kind of like a liminal space on the road, as I think I had mentioned, but that people are moving in and out and in and out all the time. And the idea of the hauntings of the Sundown Motel is because some of these traumatic aspects of what's going on in this town are literally tied to the land itself. So the ghost, the woman who haunts the Sundown Motel, was killed by the serial killer, and her body was dumped there before the motel existed, like on the land. And so she and the motel, a couple times, it's hinted that the hotel itself is like stuck in time or out of time or liminal, and that the ghost and the hotel are almost as one. Like she can control everything at the hotel, and when she's angry, like crazy stuff starts happening at the hotel, etc. But you also have the bad things that happen at the hotel for people who are traveling through that haunt it as well. And so the hotel itself becomes like a history of sorts of the town, which I thought was really interesting. And then I guess I'm a sucker for the dual timeline because I really like that in the Book of Cold Cases. I like the way that the story builds with us learning like what Viv is doing, and then just when we're like, oh no, Viv, watch out, then we learn more from Carly. And I think I felt like it was believable the way that Carly and her Scooby gang that she's working with Nick and Heather, two people that she meets in town and at the hotel, worked. Like the way they kind of uncover stuff through newspapers and whatever. Whereas Viv is also doing her own archival research and also, following people and doing all kinds of stuff. And like the Book of Cold Cases, which was obviously about true crime with someone running a true crime website, this played with that a little bit, with Viv getting wrapped up in trying to solve a mystery. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot, and I don't know. I mean, we'll have to make a decision, I guess, as we go if we full out spoil the ending. But we were already talking about that before we started the episode, because anytime you write a ghost story, sometimes there are little holes or gaps, and then the reader kind of has to struggle sometimes with those ambiguities. And I thought that was interesting as well, like the mixing of the genres of mystery and supernatural too, and what the heck does that mean? But yeah, those are just some of my kind of flailing thoughts. Matt, Lisa, what did you guys think? Matt, I know you were rereading it at this point.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in if that's all right. Obviously, I liked it enough to recommend it to you all back when I read it. I'm trying to remember when I read it for the first time. I don't remember if it was right after it came out or if it was more 2021. That whole, like everyone else, like 2020 to 2022 is just a big blur together in my brain. So I know at some point in that 2 year COVID pandemic lockdown span, I read the book, and I was actually trying to remember how I stumbled on the book because I think that it was recommended to me on Goodreads, if I remember right, or it may have been somebody that like I follow, like some like book Instagram people. It might have been a recommendation there. I honestly don't remember how I came across the book, but I remember reading the the back of the book synopsis and was like, well, this sounds really interesting. And yeah, I like the book a lot. It's a lot of fun. I also I feel like you kind of said everything that I was going to say. Honestly, I love the dual timelines. I really enjoyed kind of that blending of the mystery that's kind of like unraveling the mystery while there's also these supernatural elements happening at the same time. I mean, I love the TV show Supernatural, like especially the early seasons where it's Monster of the Week and they're doing stuff that's just like this, unraveling a supernatural mystery kind of thing. And so yeah, this book is like was right up my alley just from even reading the description on it, and it did not disappoint. I enjoyed it, and I feel like it was just as good on a reread, partly because I had honestly forgotten a lot of the finer points of the plot. I'm gonna blame the COVID pandemic and lockdown on that as well. So, but I did remember before I started rereading the overall feeling and how I enjoyed the book and some of the main points of it, and it was fun to reread, even kind of knowing where things were going to go.
So I think listening to you talk, Matt, obviously, I remember when you first read this book because I remember you recommending it, and I went and bought it right after you recommended it, and then it sat on my bookshelf because I have a book buying problem, and I'm very glad that we're recording this so that it forced me to pull it off the shelf um, and read it. So yeah, I've been looking at this cover of this book for a while, but I haven't read it. And unlike Mel, I haven't read any other Simone St. James either. I will say that I will definitely buy her books or perhaps go to the library and pick up a few more of hers because I did really enjoy it. Matt, when you were talking about Supernatural, I thought of that too, the TV show, because I thought this is exactly the type of hotel, and we're talking about horror hotels and kind of what makes them scary, and this is exactly the kind of place that Sam and Dean would have checked into if they were in a small town. Pull into the rundown roadside motel that nobody but maybe one or two people checks into, and they're going to pay in cash, and they're not, or nobody's going to check their IDs, and they don't even have to sign the book if they don't want to. They just kind of ask for a key and go in. This definitely, I think, would fit Sam and Dean's needs. And honestly, I'm surprised they didn't come across more of these roadside motels that were haunted themselves. Um, I kind of wish that they had checked into the Sundown because that would have been a fun episode. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I read a lot of horror. I read a lot of supernatural, especially like gothic supernatural books. I haven't read too many just kind of straightforward mystery thrillers that also have hauntings in them. So this was fun. This was a lot of fun. And I really did um I enjoyed the dual timelines. I loved getting to know like both Viv and Carly and their stories as they were kind of interwoven throughout. I think St. James I think she did a really good job at just giving like letting the story kind of naturally unfold in front of you. Um which was really interesting, and changing things at the last minute. Like maybe I think since this is like a big mystery, maybe we don't spoil the ending for our listeners, but I will say she does quite a few rug pulls towards the end that felt enjoyable as a reader. Sometimes those aren't always fun. It's like it's not always fun where you feel like you have a handle of what's going on and then suddenly it's something different. But this one was an enjoyable read. I really liked the setting. I liked Fell, New York. It seemed like I like this idea of this like small town where nothing seemingly ever happens, but also a lot has been happening there. And this idea of people feeling drawn, because both Viv and Carly feel like it's home, even though it's not for either one of them. When we get to know their stories, both of them, we kind of see them coming into town for for various reasons. For Viv, it's because she's on her way supposedly to New York to be an actress, but really she just wants to get away from home. And so when she ends up in Fell, it feels a little bit of an accident, and then she doesn't leave. And Carly's kind of the same way. I mean, she goes there for the express purpose of figuring out what happened to her aunt all those years ago, but she ends up feeling drawn to the place, even outside of just the fact that her aunt disappeared there. So I found that very intriguing. It was like, this idea that Fell kind of chooses who lives there in a weird way. Um and I also really like, and I know this is something that we have talked about before on the podcast too, is how, a lot of times when we're dealing with true crime, because this does have like a true crime feel to it, even though it's fiction. And there's a lot of talk too about the women in the story liking true crime and kind of being drawn to that. In fact, Simone St. James even dedicates it to the odd girls, the nerdy girls, and the murderinos. So, like the ones who kind of follow true crime. I think she does a really good job of showing us, the reader, the kind of the real life human effect that this kind of true crime has. So, not just in showing us like the lives of the victims, which is important. But also, I think because Carly is Viv's niece, we see what trauma. I hate to use that word because I feel like that's become a buzzword in horror circles lately. Is like, let's talk about the trauma of it. But I think she does a really good job at showing like the ripple effect of what this violence and these crimes have on people, the family members who are left behind. And I mean, we see that in like the characters of Callum and Nick, and who come into Carly's life when she's investigating, but because they have in their own past um things. Again, I'm gonna be a little bit vague because I don't want to venture into into any sort of spoiler territory, but um I don't know. I do like that we get to see the real kind of human effect of that too. And I don't know, St. James just made it immensely readable too. And that's a really, I think, heavy topic, but I liked it. So yeah, I'll definitely be reading more St. James for sure.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying, Lisa. I also feel that the twists were earned. Even one that I started to see coming, it was done in a way like they worked. Uh and the other thing, and I don't think this is gonna spoil it per se, but there's parts of the mystery. Yeah, I mean, Viv, people underestimate her because they look at her as she's like a 21-year-old young woman in 1987 or 1982. And they don't take her seriously when she actually starts to solve this mystery because unlike the police who aren't seeing the connections between the women, there's a lot of talk of, unfortunately, the perfect murder victim. If there's some sort of, if there's something in the woman's life that's negative in some way or perceived negatively by society, it makes things more difficult because there's judgment involved. I think St. James, she puts all this in there, like you said, that's like humanizing all the characters and showing the way that people even react to crime or how it's even solved. We deal with that with our three victims of Betty, the like, school teacher, who's the first victim, and then the married Kathy with the child and the job, and then Victoria, the teenager who people kind of spread a bit of gossip and almost slander about her, and so she's not treated like the other victims in a way. And Viv looks past all that and humanizes them and sees the connections. And she starts to almost, in her obsession with solving the mystery, almost start to look at it from the killer's perspective in a way, not in like a way that he's like that's like taking over. It is taking over her life, but it's like you said, it's when she hears Kathy's mom talking or she sees people on TV. Viv wants to get justice. Viv wants to get answers for these people. For her, it's all about kind of doing the right thing because she can see how this could happen and kind of women's place and places in the world and their position in the world. And so, yeah, she doesn't really get taken seriously by a lot of older people, or people are just afraid for her. And so I thought it was interesting that even though we kind of know that Viv's on the right track, St. James leaves a lot open. Like it keeps you going. Like there's way more mystery than just kind of the main mystery, if that makes sense. And I think we're also like kind of the mystery of Carly figuring out what Viv discovered. But yeah, I agree with you that the way she deals with the characters, particularly the women in the book, is in a crime book like this is really um, nuanced. I guess would be the best way I could think of. Very careful and very nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, they really did underestimate um Viv, and like I get it was 1982, and she even plays around with it with having um the one female cop at the time that Viv gets to know because she's been put on nights, and so she's the one to always respond when there's a problem at the Sundown Motel when Viv is working. Viv is like the night, I almost said night nurse, but not quite. She's the night clerk, checking people in and kind of dealing with things, and because it's a seedy motel, um, in this tiny town, there end up being issues that she has to call the police for. So she gets to know the like one policewoman on the force, and there's talk of her her being put on nights because they're basically trying to get her to quit. Like nobody wants a woman on the force, and so they're they're trying to make her job basically so miserable that she'll just walk away and quit. And um that plays into it too, because I think when Viv really starts to uncover what's happening and put things together, I think there is this sense of, even though she has a cop helping her out, there's a sense of nobody is going to listen to us until and unless we have real hard proof that nobody can dispute. Like nobody's just going to sit down and listen to all of this work that you've put in. You know, Basically you have to make it so clear, um which is, I don't know, it's just that was frustrating for me to read. So in that way, I'm glad that we had Carly's storyline, because I do feel like that having the 2017, even though there's still some of that in the 2017, is the like the idea that people maybe won't listen to what she has to say. Um I don't know. I'm glad we had that dual timeline to balance it out, because um that part of the story was like both very realistic, but also for a reader and a fan of these characters, very frustrating to me, as I was just kind of like, okay, why are we not listening? Why are we not listening to the women? And this isn't really a spoiler, but when Viv starts to get into things that are happening outside in Fell are bleeding into the Sundown, which kind of awakens the ghosts. I mean, again, I'm trying to avoid too many spoilers. But there are women who are going missing and who are dying, and so they know that there is a murderer on the loose in Fell, New York. And Viv starts to, both because she's interested in it and she's kind of drawn to the macabre, but also because it is crossing over into some of the things that are happening at the Sundown. Um, she starts to really kind of go on the case. And at one point, she is actually ahead. I mean, she's ahead of the police nearly the entire time, but she's actually ahead of almost ahead of the killer himself. Um, in the fact that, like, there's a point where at least I thought as a reader, oh, maybe they can stop a murder from happening, and then they don't. The woman who has gone missing ends up dead, and so that was one of those moments where I was just like, why are we not listening to these women? It had there I don't know, there wasn't, even though this was like the 1982 timeline, the 2017 is supposed to be the kind of like now contemporary, even though that's a few years ago. But like the 1982, even though when we were back there, it had like an immediacy to it, which I think goes to like St. James's talent too. That we kind of think we know how it's all going to play out in 1982, but we don't. And I don't know, there was just such good tension and suspense.
I absolutely, excuse me. I absolutely agree about the tension and suspense, and I was concerned about it when I first read it because I thought, oh well, we've got these dual timelines. They're so far apart, and you feel confident that you know what happens to Viv and all of the things that are in there, but without spoiling anything, there are some twists that you may not expect, readers who have not read this before. And she does a great job with navigating the fact that one of these plot lines has already happened while still keeping you, the reader, in the dark. And that's something that I noticed um, on this reread, that like it's a really well crafted story in the way that she tells the 1982 story, the way it unravels and unveils itself for you as the reader. So even as like as you even as someone who has reread it, while I was rereading it and remembering things that I had forgotten since the first read through, it there is that. You said suspense, and that really is a great word for it. Like, she keeps you going on, where even if you think, "Oh, okay, I know what happened mostly," but I totally agree with you about that thinking, "Oh, maybe we can prevent a murder." um, but I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling just a little bit, but I really loved the way that the plot was crafted and the way that she worked through it uh throughout the novel.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. Um, and I think, and one of the things I wanted to bring up was the idea of the ghosts and the haunting in this, like the fact that it's a mystery and a thriller, and also got supernatural stuff in it too. Um, I think what you both are talking about, also the dual timeline definitely plays a role with that. But I also think it's interesting that this is a space that has been haunted since like before the building was there, kind of. And so Viv is being haunted by ghosts, and Carly is being haunted by kind of the same ghosts. So you almost have this like slippage between Carly and Viv sometimes, where they're both kind of the investigator in each of these lines, and they kind of, Carly is like following the footsteps of Viv sometimes without even knowing. Um, and so I thought that the haunting is really just interestingly tied into the fact that we have two timelines, because Carly's haunted by everything that's happened in 1982, and Viv is haunted by everything that happened with the hotel before that. And so you have this, Carly talks about how it's like 2017, and I thought St. James handled this really well. Like, not a lot of cell phone service, Wi-Fi doesn't work, they don't have money for improvement, so it's weird because like Carly might be wearing the same vest that Viv wore in 1982. Like the sundown doesn't change. And so you have this like weird like static space while one person is in one timeline and one person is in another. So you have that cool dual timeline that you have in mystery sometimes, but you also have the ghosts that branch, like bridge in some ways, both of them, which I thought was cool. And St. James has these really great passages, which I got to reading the book so fast because I wanted to find out what was going to happen. I didn't stop and like circle them or whatever, but just talking about time. And I thought that was really neat the way she handled that because mysteries and ghost stories have a lot in common, and I think she uses the tropes of both of them in really cool ways and connects them in really interesting ways. I mean, this is a mystery book. As I was mentioning earlier, we were talking about the end. Like it ends as a mystery should end, but it also ends with a little ambiguity as a ghost story should end in a way. Like she honors like both of the genres that she's writing, which I think is really cool. But then I also wanted to say, like, Lisa, you were saying that, I think we could call this, there's some horrific aspects of this, right? There's horror in this. I mean, there's callbacks to Psycho, which I thought were pretty, that worked really well. Um, I thought the ghosts were scary. I would not want to be at the Sundown Motel. Like that scene where Carly is being like slowly pursued by the kid that died in the pool and she's like limping away because she's just walking away and basically say like you're not real, like while he keeps doing his thing and just following her. It was so creepy. And the what happens with the lights and stuff, like I felt like St. James did a good job making the ghost truly scary. So it's not just the suspense and the horror around the fact that Viv discovers there's a serial killer, but it's also the supernatural stuff is scary too, and that gets worse and worse as the book goes on because it's tied to the two women figuring out what happened. So I don't. I mean, Lisa, I think you were talking about the horror of it or the supernatural aspect. Did you also feel like the ghosts were well drawn and that they were scary?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's where I kind of struggled. This is just, I mean, we could talk genre and subgenre forever and debate it, but I know this was like marketed as a supernatural thriller, but this read as a horror book to me. Um, absolutely. I will tell you, and again, this is not a spoiler because I'm not going to tell you when or where or why it happens, but um, there was one point in the book where she knows that the ghosts are being active, and you learn, and this is also playing really well, I think, into the suspense that she does, is you learn when certain ghosts act up or like show themselves or make their presence known, it is tied to something that's happening in the real world. So that, that kind of adds to the I think danger of it, is because when she's there and then you start to see a ghost being active, um you're like, oh, oh, wait, I know what that means. Like I know why this ghost is being active and nothing is good is going to happen now. So that was just really well done, but there was one point, and this is just one example in the book, but she's in the hotel, and of course she's in the hotel at night. Like all of this happens at night, and she's like by herself, and we have no reason to trust any of the other people who are around her, like in the hotel. Um, so there is this kind of feeling of she's alone, but also maybe in danger. But anyway, she's at the hotel. It's night. She knows that the ghosts are there, and she opens up the door to like look out, and she sees a ghost looking up at her from the parking lot, and the ghost just points to something. And again, I'm avoiding spoilers, so I'm not going to tell you what, but at that point it was so like, even now describing it, my um hairs on my arm are standing up. Like I nearly threw the book across the room at that point because I was just like, no. Like I don't like, having a ghost is bad enough, but having a ghost like silently communicating with you, it was It was terrifying. So yeah, that is to say that she does it really well. Where yes, this is a kind of true crime mystery. We're gonna kind of find out who the murderer is type of story, but the hauntings itself were also very scary. And because this isn't always the case, there was a very real sense that these ghosts could like harm you. Um, which again is not always, sometimes in these kind of supernatural mysteries, the ghosts are just there to be like clues to what happened. Almost like, okay, they were there as like witnesses of the past crime and reminders of that, and metaphors for the trauma. But these ghosts, and they're not all bad, we find out, but and some of them, as you pointed out, were there before the hotel was even built. But these ghosts can interact with the physical reality in a way that it was very clear that they were not safe to be around. So yeah, it was scary.
I just want to say really quickly, when you have a scary ghost pointing out an even probably scarier ghost, that is the ultimate in supernatural horror, I think. Okay, listeners, I think we'll end on that image of a scary ghost warning us of something else scary that could be around the corner. We decided that we didn't want to necessarily spoil the ending, so I think we'll just go ahead and cut ourselves off here. We hope that this discussion has moved you to go read The Sundown Motel, or really, I say read The Sundown Motel, but I can say, having read several of St. James's books, that you really kind of can't go wrong with these supernatural thrillers that she does. And I'm so glad that we did this episode, because it got me to keep going in her work, and it just worked so perfectly with this series that we've been doing so far. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We have a bunch of mini episodes there from past series that you can check out. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, KNOW fearcast.com, or simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.